Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. And welcome back, everybody. He is a valuable resource for many in many different areas. It could be you're a parent, have some challenges with your child or children, or maybe you're somebody that wants to go into the field that he spent many years helping parents and students as a school psychologist at the Reed Union School District. So great to have him back with us. This is Good Advice Helps with Dr. Allan Gold, who is back on the program. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. Enjoying San Francisco weather. It's been nice and unfoggy, like summer usually is.
You know, it's been nice here in New York, but I always forget about the fog element there. How often is it not foggy?
Whoops. It's not foggy in the spring and in like late August through September and October. But it's usually because the Central Valley is very hot and it draws in the moisture from the ocean. So yes, the Bay Area usually gets it.
And I did a deep dive a few weeks ago looking at this is what I do at night. Like I'm just laying in bed and I'm like, what's the weather like there? And the bay and all of that. Come to learn that water always stays roughly at the same temperature, around 60 degrees. A little fluctuation here and there, but that's about what it is. So when you think about it's summertime, it's warm in other areas, and then you have that cold water there. I guess that's part of the fog, I'm guessing.
Yes, it is.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, it's been pretty nice.
Beautiful.
Lately.
So we have a lot going on today. We're going to start with what's going on here, and that's where we give you a hypothetical situation, but one that's I'm sure rings true for many, and get your insight as a school psychologist. So we've got a fifth grade student repeatedly accused of intimidating others, friends, classmates, making cruel comments, getting into some minor physical altercations. Other parents are demanding some kind of disciplinary action, asking that he be removed from the classroom. But one teacher mentioned that he's unusually protective of younger students and becomes emotional whenever his home life is discussed. So I ask, what do you think is really going on here?
Oh, my goodness. So if he's being a bully, which it sounds like that description would be, the question is what's happening to him? It sounds like the parents are the parents concerned? Did they express that?
They have concern that he continues to do this in class, but it's interesting that during that meeting, a teacher mentioned that he's usually protecting younger students.
Yeah, so that's very interesting because that's usually not the case. So I guess my first question, what's going on at home, to prompt any of this? Perhaps he's a middle brother and being badly teased by his older siblings and may feel protective of his younger siblings. I don't know. There could be his peers he feels maybe much safer with younger kids, and his peers are teasing him. But it sounds like he's the one that's doing it. That's a challenging question. And, we don't know what kind of abuse may be going on at home from the parents, and he's taking it out on other people. I don't know if he would be willing to, well, I know this is a hypothetical case, but if would be willing to talk to anybody about it. It sounds like the school is under pressure to discipline him for sure, which is appropriate if he's really being very mean to other kids. But the first step would be to have him talk to somebody who's whom he could trust. It might be a counselor or the psychologist. Even his teacher might be somebody who he likes and trusts, to find out what's prompting all of this. And there should be lots of observations, like what where does this happen? Is this only at recess? Is this in the classroom as well? What triggers those comments? Is it something, because it could be things that the other kids say that are very provocative, and they might do it subtly. Hey, you're really a creep, or something like that. And all the adults hear is his overt reaction to some of those comments. Um, Ultimately, he might need private therapy, you know,
Mm.
depending on, is he depressed? Can he not manage his anger? Does he have attention deficit disorder, which, might disable him from containing his comments? So, these are, all kids are complex. And any behaviors could be due to a lot of different causes. And the real trick is doing the investigation, finding out as much data as possible. Um, so in this case, I think trying to figure out what triggers him, whether he's able to tell. Now, he might, a fifth grader can be pretty smart and manipulative. He might blame other people too, and then it might be important to get some of these kids who are victims of his, in a mediated and supervised discussion, try to figure out what's going on. So there's a lot of work there, and we're not really sure what he will reveal to a counselor, a psychologist, a private therapist, teacher. So that's why objective observation is also important, to kind of, put oneself in those places where these things happen, and observe what
Sure.
triggers the behaviors.
Now, I wonder, and we talked before we got on here today, kind of in a fun way, about how our subconscious pilots us, especially from our childhood as adults. He's 12. Is
Oh,
it possible?
he's
Yeah,
12?
well, fifth grade. Fifth, isn't that
Well, that's more like 10 or 11.
10, 11? Okay. Can your subconscious be piloting you in a direction even at that age?
Oh, I think so. Yes. I mean,
Mm.
a lot. Um, in fact, I think kids in general probably operate more on their subconscious than their awareness. If something happens to them early on, and they haven't articulated it, they haven't really thought about it.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I hear it much more now from adults, even my own age, who talk about what their parents did to them when they were young. And I don't think they were, whether they were aware of it or not. Um, the people didn't, kids don't talk about that. Well, maybe now a little bit more. They may, depending on who their friends are. And, my mom is so mean to me, or, my dad hits me or something like that. They may be more inclined to do that in this day and
Mm.
age than they were when I was growing up. But I've also learned about close friends who will tell me how their parents treated them and how it affected them. And my guess is that kids do sort of operate. They don't, how they're treated to them is normal, because they don't necessarily know how other kids are treated, because they're not living in other families. So, excuse me, if they're treated badly, they assume, I guess this is just the way, it is to grow up. And their reactions can be really controlled by unconscious or subconscious thoughts.
Mm.
So I think that's true.
Got an email from Jacob in Des Moines. Checks in at instantfeedbacksteve@gmail.com. He says, I'm looking at different careers. Can you describe a moment when you realized your work completely changed the trajectory of a child's life and what happened years later, if you know?
Um, that's a good question. One thing that's interesting about being a school psychologist is it's very different than solving a math problem. Either you get it right or you get
Mm-hmm.
it wrong. But when you're working with young people, you don't always, in fact, I would say rarely see immediate changes. Sometimes you do. Like I had a third grader I tested for ADHD, and his parents actually medicated him. And he came to me the very next day after he had taken pills, and he said, "Boy, I'm really changed." And he recognized it,
Wow.
and that was instant. And of course, that was based on some medication. But when you work with children on their psychological um, issues, it does take time to make changes. Um, Now, I sometimes it takes, till they're out of your purview. They might be in high school and they might come back and say, Dr. Gold, you really, really helped me then, but they weren't able to express it or realize it at the time. I've had a lot of those comments from older people. You really, really helped me with my friend and or what my parents, whatever I was doing. But younger kids are not necessarily able to recognize that and articulate it and realize they're changing. So that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing not to know immediately. Um, but I think one of the aspects of the career is you have to be patient. Sometimes whether it's with parents or kids, you sometimes have to wait days, months, years to realize that you have made an impact. I mean, I'll bump into parents that I um, hadn't seen for years, and they would say, "Boy, what you told me so helped me." And I
Mm.
didn't even remember necessarily what I'd said. But so I think, if somebody needs immediate feedback and satisfaction, then that's probably not the right career. But if you have faith in yourself that time will, what you advise and how you help people, um, uh, over time, it will make a difference. Um, so I don't know if that answers that
And
question.
that's a great point because you're bringing back thoughts of somebody who I know the last number of years was looking at career differently. And just what you said, they realized that some of the positions they had, you didn't have an instant result. They were more wired for that.
Yeah.
Fix it, move on to the next. Achieve
Yeah, I mean,
this,
and,
move on
and,
to the
and
next.
young people these days, given all of the video games and everything, you want to win, and if you don't, you move on, you start it over again, and
Yeah.
and there's very, very instant feedback about winning or losing, and patience is so important in the school psychology field. Each session you have with a child, sometimes you get a positive reaction, which is, yeah, I'm going to try that with my friend. And and then you feel good, and then you meet with them the next week and say, "Did you try that?" Well, I kind of didn't, or yeah, I did, and it worked.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I might have mentioned before when I would teach kids about managing anger. I had a fourth grade student who was having these really angry reactions because his best friend called him by his last name, and he would yell at him and sometimes even hit him. And I gave him a technique to manage that. And 3 weeks later, I spoke to him, and he said, "Yeah, and that last time he did that, I gave, I thought of putting it in perspective, and I used an I statement. I said, that really makes me uncomfortable. Can you just call me by my first name? And the other kid apologized and stopped doing
Uh,
it. So that was a fairly quick um, positive response.
mm.
And I felt good that I was able to teach this kid that technique. Does that work with everybody? No. So, I
Yeah.
think with being a school psychologist, you have to be very flexible and very patient and very kind to yourself. You try to do the best things, and if those don't work, then you have to be flexible and try something else. So you're never quite sure what's going to work with an individual.
So, deeper question here. This is from Marcus in Atlanta. And he says, how much of your job involves crisis situation like self-harm, trauma, abuse, or suicide assessments? And then he goes on to say, how do people in this field mentally protect themselves from burnout while doing their job?
Okay. I would say a small percentage of kids were involved with that.
Hmm.
Less than 5%, I would say.
Okay.
In fact, maybe even only 1% or something like that. But that it's extremely stressful, and you work with other people on the campus, the teachers to protect kids, you inform parents right away. If it's self-harm, yeah, no, I would have kids deal with kids who would, cut themselves and that kind of thing. And rarely, but occasionally, some suicidal thoughts. Not very often, thank goodness. I mean, I don't even think I would have maybe one a year. But we used to do a suicidal um, program for seventh graders, Signs of Suicide, where we would meet with them for each we did it with PE, each PE class for 50 minutes and talk about signs of suicide and how to respond if a friend is talking that way or if they themselves feel that way. And then we did a survey. Um, the first time we did it, we were thinking, should we keep this confidential? And I said, no, let's not. I mean, in terms of not putting their name on the little 7 question survey.
Mm.
And then they were, because I felt, middle school kids can be open and honest about that. And my other psychology partner and I would identify, maybe 20 kids that we were concerned about and interview them and occasionally there would be one, maybe two that had suicidal thoughts. Um, and we would do what we needed to do, which is contact the parents for that kind of thing. Um, but the question, how do you protect yourself from burnout? I think that's a very individual thing. That's why I think individual therapy for every school psychologist is important because you can talk about your own feelings and how to manage them. And if you are feeling burnt out, what can you do to address that? Is it too stressful to deal with these very difficult situations? Are you more fragile? Over time, and I just learned that you don't take everything like it's happening to you or somebody you love. And that
Mm.
sounds like, you still want to have the empathy and the caring and all of your intellectual ability put into trying to figure out interventions. But if you sort of um, overlive it, then you can get burnt out. You can go home and all you do is think about this kid that you talked to today or these kids. So the part of the profession is trying to build some armor, um, not impermeable armor, but
Mm.
some kind of mental protection so that you don't feel like you've got to solve everything, or if somebody does something, it's all your fault, does something to themselves. Um, you want, and yet you want to maintain that empathy and understanding and caring for people. So it's tricky, and some people, you can do it. They can do it fairly quickly. Other people, it's very hard for them to do that. I mean, there are you'd expect a psychologist to be a sensitive person anyway. Um, but if they're sort of overly sensitive because of their own personalities, it may be very difficult for them and they can get burnt out. So, but that's why I think private therapy in my own therapy, I would talk about personal stuff that didn't have to do with career. I would talk, maybe a third or half of the time about
Sure.
career issues, what do I do about this kid? And, I'm feeling really bad. And
It's a big
yeah,
part of your
so
life. It's a big part of your life, that, and even
yeah,
more so
yeah.
because now because of the job and who you are, more connected, more emotionally connected. Um, let's pivot over to golden tools that you can use. You are Dr. Allan Gold. And these are things that you can use with your kids or
Yes.
things to share. What do we got today?
Well, I like to talk about respect.
Hmm.
Um, so what do we mean by respect? It can be esteem. You really respect somebody. You have a high regard for them. Um, Particularly important is the way you act to show awareness of somebody else's rights and wishes and feelings, to treat people in a proper way. And I think particularly now in this culture and society, we're seeing less and less respect for people. So I think for parents, it's super important to be aware of what respect is and how to develop it in your children. Um, so I think I have a lot of different suggestions about what parents could do. I believe they should model respectful behavior. Um, so don't belittle other people. Don't shame other people or yell at other people. Use a calm voice. Apologize if you've said something um, mean or uncourteous, and you know, to be polite to people, to even just say thank you for that. And the more parents can model respectful behavior, the greater the chance that the kids would learn it. Um, it's particularly important, and I think it's so important now, is to think about what you say before you say it.
Mm.
Now, kids with attention deficit disorder, that gets in the way. But for, people without that disability, as they get older, I mean, you can't do it when kids are really little. They'll just say what they're going to say. But, from the time kids are 8 or 9 or so, um, parents need to demonstrate and talk about, well, think about how if you said that to somebody, how do you think they would handle it? And that parents could make up situations. What if somebody, make up a situation, and what if somebody had a torn shirt? What would you say? Oh, why are you wearing a torn shirt? That's so stupid. Now, how do you think the person would react to that if you didn't think about it? How else could you express that? Another ap aspect of respect is how do you treat people who are different than you? And we see that now so badly happening.
Mm.
Immigrants, transgender people, LGBTQ community. Um, it's always been African American or Hispanic people that are treated differently. They're stereotyped. They're, um, accused of things that they haven't done. So, um, it's so important to try to understand people who are different than you, and to try to find things in common, and to ask in a respectful way. I mean, asking questions, I think, is very important, but how you do it, how you word your questions, and with the tone of voice. Why are you doing that? That's not good. But you say, I'm really curious. How come you are doing this? And certainly, it's true now for with the uh, this extreme division and political viewpoints in this
Mm.
country. How do we respect somebody who really doesn't believe what we believe in? And that's very, very hard now. I'm struggle with that too. But there are ways to try to at least ask questions. And I'm really curious. Why are you still um, for Trump or something like that? Um, Maybe you'd put it a different way. What is it about Trump that you really like? I'm trying to understand that. Um, so I think it's, for kids, you know, I'm, they're not so politically aware for at least young
But
kids.
they're
Uh,
aware. That's I
but
always,
they're,
you know,
yeah.
they're always listening. They're always watching. Even as a parent, you might not think that they're picking up on what you're throwing out there.
Oh, yeah.
Even driving in the car and somebody cuts you off, and the way you react to it, you might see them doing the same thing in a week from
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think parents should really notice and praise respectful behavior in kids.
Sure.
That was really great when you thanked so and so for helping you or for whatever they gave you, or, that kind of thing. So, because, ki parents don't always do that. What parents do is criticize or correct, but they don't. Um, they don't necessarily praise the positive things or compliment.
Thank you for bringing that up. We're out of time. We're going to end on that, but that
Hey,
is,
we could talk more about it another time
yeah,
if
we'll
you
pick up from where we left off. I got to tell you, even though it may sound rhetorical about praising your kids and positive behavior, we forget it. Parents forget. We're there to help them steer them back on course through the
Yes,
negatives, but we forget
right,
about the positives.
right.
Great stuff today. If anybody you want to reach out, got a question, need some insight, maybe you got kids, maybe you're looking at a career in school psychology, you can always reach us at instantfeedbacksteve@gmail.com. Allan, thank you so much for being here today. Good stuff. Appreciate
My
it.
pleasure. Thank you. Hope it was helpful.
And happy pre-birthday. Just throwing that out there.
Okay, thank you.
Coming soon.
Next time you see me, I'll be an old guy.
I'm right behind you there. Trust me. And you're not. I'm not going to reveal your age, but you don't look anywhere close to that. Subtract easily 15 years from that.
Well, I'm going to be 120, so it looks
Well, then
good.
you look great. All right. We'll talk soon. I appreciate it.
Okay, bye.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.